just want to spend some time thinking about the self and the body, and what it is to be an individual, what it is to be part of a set of social relations, how those things impinge upon this idea of the self, and maybe tangentially about consciousness and perception. I've made a few videos about these things lately, and in my most recent one I was talking about ants. And Gary, you made a response to that video on your Do Not God channel, on a Blip TV channel, Do Not God. And I'm partly being influenced by that, because that called out some clarifications which I think can be useful. First thing about consciousness, I'm going to try and sidestep consciousness, because it's too complicated really. It's too ill-defined. There's too many different versions of what people mean by consciousness. It's not terribly well articulated scientifically. It flips over into stupid mystical conversations too easily, and all kinds of value judgments follow those kind of discussions. So I want to steer clear of those for now and just talk about the self instead, and the self concept. Okay, I mean all animals, all animals that have got central nervous systems, all animals that are capable of motricity, of moving about, and as I say, I've got central nervous systems, have, I would say, some sense of a self. They might not have a self concept, and I'll explain the difference in a minute, but they'll have some kind of concept of a self, by which I mean they will have something like a body schema. Body schema comes from Sean Gallagher, I think. I've used that term, but it's been around in different forms before that and around since that, and it's common sense in many ways. We have what it basically says is that if you've got a central nervous system with any kind of a brain attached to it, then your brain, in order to be able to function as a kind of CEO for the corporation of your body, contains a kind of representation of your body within it. So it knows, your brain maps your arms and legs and their locations in space, and maps the goings on in your body and the changes in your body, and the stabilities, the things that stay the same in your body as well. These things are all mapped in your brain, and as I say, I represent a body schema, which I think, and I'll come on to this, is one of the templates that we use, all animals use, as a basis for what we call a self. But we know the body schema is there, because obviously, if you close your eyes and wave your arms about, you don't forget where your arms are. There's a strong sense of where the sensory experience of your arms continues even when you can't see them. Now it's partly to do with your proprioceptive sense, but also because you've got this body schema telling you what the range of possibilities are, and what you can do. And we also know it from things like phantom limbs. If you get a limb amputated, quite often, the majority of cases actually, people who have the amputation will still feel the existence of the limb. And it can even be painful in some cases. They'll feel it sticking out into space. So people who just had an arm amputated will still skirt as they go through a doorway, will still give room for their arm as if it's about to bang into the doorway. And they're doing that because their brain is still telling them that they've got an arm. It's still part of their body schema, their physical schema they've got in their brain. Okay, so we've all got that. Some parts of that body schema are, as I say, regular, and some of them are irregular. Some of them, but they all persist in different ways. The physical schema I just mentioned, the position of your arms and legs in space. They're obviously they do change. Your arms move about, your legs move about, your head moves about, all the joints move. But within very constrained limits, and within very organised patterns. You would sharp know about it if your knee bent the wrong way or something. So that possibility is not built into your schema. Your schema contains information about the range of movement of these joints, and presumably things like balance and weight as well. But those are quite variable, but they're varied within constrained limits. Some other parts of your schema barely vary at all. Because your schema doesn't just contain, as I say, physical information about the location of your limbs. It also contains information about things like your biochemistry. That's all part of your schema, and that in many cases that'll be quite regular. You know, your pulse or your heart rate or your the various actions of your glands. Baby guy, come on! I get these dogs off the trail. Come on, pups! So all these, all that kind of patterned information is also being represented in your brain, but in a way which hardly varies at all. You know, it's part of your kind of core physical self, really. So all that's going on. So we all have this, not just us, but all animals, as I say, that've got that. Reptiles have got it, fish, dogs, birds, anything with a CNS. We've all got that stuff. Phoebe, come on! Come on, pup! We've all got that physical schema, body schema. Animals that have got a self-concept, by which I mean animals that don't just move about and do stuff, but kind of know they're alive and know that they are a thing in the world. I've got this concept of a self, and I'd say that concept of a self is partly or possibly largely built on the back of that template that's provided by the body schema. And here I'm drawing on Thomas Metzinger, Being No One is this book. So this self-concept. All animals that have got those things, as I mentioned before, of course they can all feel pain, they all feel pleasure, they've all got that stuff going on, the carrot and the stick that nature provides to keep you in line. But in addition to that, some animals, higher primates, possibly dolphins, and obviously ourselves, don't just have a sense of pain, they have a sense of being a person that feels pain, or being an entity that feels pain. They can recognise themselves as the experiencers of that pain. It isn't just kind of, too complex. Okay, so they've got a self-concept, we've got a self-concept. And as I say, I think that self-concept is largely based upon the body schema that the brain contains, which maps the body in its complexity and its range of variability. Okay, so far so good. But that really, for me at least, only accounts for a self-concept for an entity that is entirely separate from all other entities, or particularly other living entities, other animals of its kind and other animals, other life forms, but also other entities in the world, objects, trees, the ground under your feet, those kind of things. But specifically other life forms, let's keep it that for now. Because your body schema, of course it maps your existence perfectly, it maps the movement of your body. And if you were, in space, surrounded by zero, your body schema would be a perfect template of what it's like to be alive and awake. But that's not how we experience the world. We experience it in contact constantly with other things. And we're constantly having to predict our relationships with other things and the impact, very literally, that other things are going to make upon us. And if you're a social species, as we are, and there's something like ants or bees, fish, birds that flock, lots of these kind of things, then you're intimately tied up with that social situation, and it would be probably, maybe not as important, but very, very important indeed for your brain to be able to map that relationship as well as it is also mapping the relationships of your body parts and the biochemistry of your body. So in all likelihood you would contain an interior map or representation of some kind of social relations and physical relationships between your own body and the trees that you nearly bump against, that kind of thing. And if, as I say, if you're a social species, particularly if you're something like an ant or a termite, something that in which the group actually shows, to the extent these things are measurable, in which the group shows more intelligence than the individual, which they do in termites and ants and some other creatures. And I won't go into humans, that's too complex. If you're one of those kinds of creatures, then the map you have of your colony in your mind must be pretty secure, pretty certain, and pretty solid, and important to you. Possibly as important or more important than the map that you have of your individual body parts moving around and the bits of biochemistry that ants have. And so again, to the extent that a self, this concept, a sense of a self-concept, maps onto those internal representations of either your physical body or your social existence or your kind of physical existence in a universe with lots of other physical stuff around you. And as much as those representations are in your brain and you're identifying with them to form a self-concept, if you're a social species like an ant, your self-concept would necessarily include those social relations, the maps of those social relations. So you would feel yourself, not consciously, not self-reflexively, but you would feel yourself to be the colony. You would not feel yourself to be the individual, or you'd feel that a lot less. That doesn't mean that there's some kind of weird interpersonal cloud of consciousness. If I can just reintroduce that term for a minute. There's not a weird cloud of interpersonal consciousness kind of hovering over you, or somehow existing between you, or magically being transferred between the colony. Doesn't mean that. It would exist as the experience of each ant in that colony. So each ant, just like every person in a football crowd, kind of feels themselves to be a crowd, kind of. And I know I'm extrapolating a bit beyond. Yeah, anyway. But in as much as you do, you feel caught up in the moment and you feel driven by the crowd, you kind of identify with the crowd. There isn't a crowd mind, there's no mind out there. The mind is still in your brain, still being generated by the complexity of the brain, still being oriented around the structures and the maps and representations that the brain is producing. But the brain is producing a representation of a crowd, and you're identifying yourself with that. And if everybody's doing the same thing, as they do presumably in ant colonies, and as they might do a little bit in football crowds, then yourself has become collective. Not because consciousness is distributed. Consciousness is still being generated by individual brains, but it contains a self-concept which is not grounded in individual body schema, but is grounded in a map of the social relationships of the colony or the crowd that you're involved in. Yeah, that's kind of what I'm saying there. I mean, there are other models. Gary, if you're watching this, you were talking about what's sometimes called a triune brain, which is this idea we have a reptilian brain, and then we have this primate brain, and then we have this higher, I think it's called a higher primate brain, something like that. But this forebrain that allows us to do the language thing and the self-reflexive stuff, where you can talk about yourself talking, that kind of self-awareness thing. Yeah, I mean, I think that's absolutely part of it. We do seem to be able to do that. But I'm wondering, and the triune brain, the reptile brain thing was, I think it's fantastic actually, I think it's all good. But it has been critiqued, and there's no real evidence for it in any real sense, but at least as firmly identified brain structures, identified with specific moments of evolutionary kind of phylogenetic history. But I think it makes a kind of sense still. I personally, for me, I would just wonder why it'd be those three. Why reptiles, monkeys, and ourselves? Why would it be those? Why not others? Why not a kind of brain which recognizes swarms? I know, because we're individuals and because we're of the kind of beings we are, we're in constant tension between being individuals and being Borgs. I recognise that. Many of us would feel our rugged individualism being challenged by the suggestion that part of our brain is doing the hive thing, and would negatively evaluate that. But there's times when it's good and times it's not good. There's times when you have to wake up and be a lone wolf, and there's other times when it's important not to do that, but to do something else. I would say. So what? Yeah. So is it? I guess I'll just to reiterate that last bit. You know, does it? You know, why just those three? Why reptile, monkey, man? Why not swarm? Why not school of fish? Why not Hydra, some other weird creature that we weren't exactly like in our evolutionary history, but why not? Why not all the possible? Why not bring in some new maps even? I mean, could we invent a new map? You know, we have these built-in maps of what a body does, and that gives us a self-concept. Can we invent a new map? Would that be an interesting challenge for us? And of course, it's very tempting to collapse back into the one that we're most familiar with and say, yeah, but this is the one that feels the pain. This is the one that feels the pleasures. This is the one that's really important, and I have some sympathy with that. But just putting that on the shelf at the moment. Is it worthwhile thinking? Is there other kinds of? Is there exercises we can do? Are there any kind of exercises we can do? Are there political and ideological situations we can put into place which encourage and promote different kinds of ways of thinking, which produce different maps in the brain of social formations, which we can identify with and say, yeah, that communism, that's me, or that whatever it is, that Tea Party, that's me. Actually, Tea Party is just like a body schema turned into politics. But yeah, is there a way of doing that which would, add to the greater good? Really, that'd be an interesting thing to think about. Yeah, and like I said in the last one, without wanting to get too metaphysical, is it possible to generate an imaginary map in the brain that through a process of reiteration and repetition and rehearsal, you can become part of your self-concept that takes into account larger things. I mean, this is shading into pantheism, which I have certain views on, as you know about. But if we are facing, for example, climate problems, if we are facing problems with population, if we are facing problems with rogue state, whatever it may be, if we are facing those kind of problems, might it be useful to think about generating a self-concept which includes the elements of the world which are at the moment distant to us and don't feel as if we're being impact. In fact, I think I did a video about this ages ago about eco-psychology. Eco-psychology just draws on this idea that we'll never really care about the world until we feel it. We'll never really care about climate change until it starts hurting. In a very literal sense, we feel ourselves as being self. That's this self thing I've been talking about. Until we feel that self as being under threat, literally under threat, then we're not actually doing anything about those kind of challenges. Eco-psychology starts in that position. You embrace ecology as a psychological component, one of the players in the psychological drama that constructs the self. I can go back to that analogy. Alongside, of course, the body schema, which is probably the most fundamental to us right now. Alongside the social schema, which keeps us thinking in terms of crowds and allows us to be a crowd for a while. And alongside perhaps a larger one that takes in all life forms, the Pandora self, let's say, that allows us to do that. I don't know, maybe. Pretty long video, this, isn't it? I've been talking for ages. My arm's getting tired. Left arm. I've probably got this ridiculously overdeveloped left arm, actually. So I've been doing these videos for about 3 years, and I always use my left arm. I'll have to measure the muscles in my arm and see if my body schema has been affected by that. Actually, it kind of has already, actually, in a weird way. I'm noticing the weight of this camera now because I've been talking for about 15 minutes probably, but generally I don't notice the fact that I've got a camera in my hand and my arm is at a funny angle when I make these videos. Never notice it. It doesn't even occur to me. It's like my left arm is just something. This position, this kind of crooked elbow at 90 degrees is so familiar to me now. you know, when accompanying this thing that's going on in my face, you know, with me talking and the air that's being pushed out through my larynx, that whole thing is so schematically engraved into my brain that it's part of who I am in a weird way. Just a small amount, not in a large area, but a small amount. My body schema now contains a camera. This weird little re-entry loop of self-filming that we're all involved in here.